much for being here. I'd love to start out just by getting to know you a little bit. So could you tell us kind of who you are, what you do professionally, and kind of your professional experience leading up to this point?
Okay. So I'm Tina and I'm wearing quite a few different hats right now actually. So that keeps things interesting for me. So I'm currently the Chief Marketing Officer at WeScaleStartups. So we essentially help startups implement growth marketing strategies, like the name suggested. I'm also a growth mentor at Mentor Cruise, where I help startups and founders with marketing as well. So I got into marketing kind of by chance, actually. Initially, I've always wanted to build a startup of my own, but I quickly realized that the thing that I'm actually fascinated about is how digital marketing or marketing in general can really help scale a company or a startup. So that got me into working in marketing. Yeah, so that's a bit about me.
And I know from your LinkedIn presence, which is amazing, by the way,
Thank you.
that you focus specifically on kind of the social side of marketing. So could
Mhm.
you tell us a little bit more? It sounds like your marketing role kind of spans like the breadth of marketing, but from what I've seen on LinkedIn, you really kind of zero in on the social side and specifically brands trying to reach like younger audiences.
Mhm.
So could you tell
Yes.
us just a bit about that?
Yes. So what I really specialize about is how Gen Z can develop a authentic and genuine connection with younger audience, being Gen Z. So I've been working with quite a few clients, but really two particular experiences stand out with me the most, which is this gaming app and one another one that is a blockchain educational app, both aimed at Gen Z. So working with these companies, I kind of witnessed firsthand how challenging it was for them to genuinely develop a connection with this audience and grab their attention. So it was like a light bulb moment for me actually. There's I saw there's a like a real gap in how companies try to understand and appeal to this particular demographic. So I sort of want to bridge this gap for them as a way to sort of help businesses connect with Gen Z in a way that is genuine and effective. And also because I am a member of Gen Z, so I want to bring like a voice of representation to my generation and seeing how difficult for brands to connect with us makes me feel like I have to do something. So yeah.
Oh, that's great. I mean, it's it sounds like a case of you're very close to the problem in the sense
Mm,
that you're a member of Gen Z, and you say, "Hey, brands are actually like really failing to like capture the attention or imagination of this audience." And
mm,
I actually know what we could do about that. So I like that you're kind of solving your own problem in a certain sense.
yes.
Um, so I'd love to kind of dig into how brands are engaging with Gen Z on social specifically. So if we can kind of just level set to start, uh, in your view and in your experience, how does Gen Z like to be engaged on social? So what does quality, authentic brand engagement feel like uh, on social networks?
So to answer this question, how does Gen Z like to be engaged? I I actually saw that there's three key aspects that stand out the most. So what they're engaging with, who they're engaging with, and how they're engaging with the content. So in terms of the what, Gen Z really gravitates towards video content, especially on platforms like TikTok, Instagram, and YouTube, and they prefer content that is not only entertaining but educational as well. So things like how-to videos and blogs. And authenticity is really important as well because they value transparency and honesty from brands. So it's really important that brands can develop sort of content that resonate with this. In terms of the who, influencers, they play a really big role in Gen Z's social media engagement. And because Gen Zs often relies on influencers for anything from product recommendations, and they're also most likely to engage with content that comes from these trusted figures as well. So they have like a really big preference for influencers who provide entertaining and relatable content. So let's actually talk about an example that that kind of sort of show the power of influencers and their impact. So I'm not sure if you heard of the Sidemen, which is this UK YouTuber and influencer group with 7 internet personalities.
I have not, but admittedly, I'm also a millennial, so I don't know if that precludes me, or maybe I'm just not online enough. But no, I haven't heard of them.
Anyways, that's okay. But they're this YouTubers group that have collectively 244 million followers across all social platforms, and they purely post entertainment videos on YouTube. So 2 weeks ago, they opened 2 new restaurants in UK called Side, and the interesting thing is that the Sidemen was actually banned from showing up at the opening from one of the location because authorities were forecasting that more than 10,000 people would show up and it would become a safety issue. And this is really interesting because it just shows the power of how influencers can really engage and influence Gen Z. So I think that's really interesting. In terms of how they're engaging with the content, I'm sure you've seen the news that TikTok is becoming a search engine, and it's really true because 74% of Gen Z, according to research, are using TikTok as a new Google. And this just kind of shows a shift in how we're acquiring information, and their engagement is not passive either. They're really like seeking out information and entertainment through these platforms, sometimes education as well. So it's really important that brands can meet them where they are. So yeah, that's all of it.
Yeah. I actually saw just recently that I think TikTok launched like a keyword research tool, so you can kind of see. I don't know if it's real time, but you can kind of get data on what people are searching for. And I know
Mm-hmm.
that as a marketer, I'm just like, great, another platform with more search data, more kind of things to figure out. Actually, reveal the company that I work for. We're not on TikTok yet. That's actually intentional because I don't think we understand the platform enough to authentically and realistically deploy a marketing strategy on that channel at this point.
Right.
Maybe I'll learn more after this talk, and maybe things will change. Um, but yeah, I mean, it's something that as a marketer, I've been aware of that, especially younger generations, like going to TikTok kind of as, like you said, the new Google. It's the all-in-one for entertainment, education, and
Mm-hmm.
engagement. And the engagement is actually the thing I wanted to zero in on a little bit. So we kind of talked at a high level about what content creation looks like, some of the
Mm-hmm.
qualities that you'd look for. In terms of actual engagement, and what I mean by that is kind of like it's like a two-way conversation with your audience. So that could be things as simple as like replying to folks in the comments.
Yep.
But could you tell us a little bit about like what are some examples of brands doing a great job actually engaging with their
Mm-hmm.
audiences on these platforms? So not just creating great content, but kind of taking it a step further and creating conversations, creating dialogues, and ultimately kind of creating a relationship, I guess, with their audience to some degree.
Um, yes, actually. So we've seen a lot of praises at Duolingo and Ryanair, because these guys are brilliant when it comes to audience engagement. If you scroll on to their Instagram, their Twitter, or their TikTok, you will see that they're actively getting involved in these any chants or any conversations that their audience is having. So it builds like a sort of relationship to them. But I'm actually going to give an example of this brand that is doing engagement in quite a unnatural way. And I've actually been talking about this in one of my LinkedIn posts, actually, but let's dive deeper. So the brand that I think is doing a remarkable job at engaging Gen Z in particular is UK sportswear brand Foot Asylum. Not sure if you heard of them,
No.
but yeah, yeah. So Foot Asylum, they have quite a unique strategy, obviously beyond content strategy. Um, but they're doing content on YouTube and they're doing it in such a bizarre way as well. So they're creating YouTube series that resonate super well with their audience, which is the 16 to 24 years old demographic in the UK. And I think what is super interesting about them is that they're not doing like the usual stuff, like talking about sports clothing on their YouTube. They're bringing in popular UK influencers like KSI, Chunks, Nicole Milana, and for all sorts of content, actually ranging from quizzes, rap battles, even dating shows and cooking competitions. Like how bizarre that is! A sportswear company doing content about this. And I think the coolest thing about their approach is that they don't shove their products in your face. Like in one of their dating shows, it's like a hit show, but they don't talk about shoes, they don't talk about clothing, or they do any obvious product placement. And I think this subtlety is a really big hit for their audience because this demographic does not like being blatantly sold to. And I think right now they have more than 2.5 million subscribers on YouTube just from doing this. And it just shows how clever their strategy is because they dive right into the culture, creating stuff that naturally goes viral and gets shared all over social media and way beyond their YouTube, direct YouTube audience as well. And I think another bizarre aspect is that they're not afraid to push boundaries because if you watch their content, sometimes they use profanity and crude humor, which understandably a lot of brands do not do. But I think they really understand their audience because that's what the audience expects from these influencers and YouTubers that they're collaborating with. And it's clear that its approach is working because their audience are very engaged and responsive in every single videos that they post on YouTube or on other platforms. So yeah, I think Puts Asylum is doing an amazing job at engaging audience beyond just content.
So that's a great example. A lot of good takeaways there, and it kind of leaves me with two follow-up questions. So one is, you said they do a great job of kind of diving into the culture, and
Mm-hmm.
I want to understand a little bit more about if you're a brand, how do you kind of understand that culture to begin with? And then my second question will be about what you do with all the kind of responses that you get to your content. So and then we can talk a little bit about like maybe how you can approach that from like a research angle. But the first question is, imagine, I'm a brand, you're consulting with me, and you say, okay, here's the playbook. You got to dive into the culture, create
Mm-hmm.
content that feels like really, authentic to your audience, really gets them, speaks their language. And then I say, great, how do I understand that in the first place? How do I kind of wrap my head around, the culture of the demographic that I'm trying to reach?
So in this case, if you actually want to understand the culture, I would really recommend just immersing yourself in the sort of community that they hang out, like the digital spaces where your audience hang out. So let's say that if you've done customer research and you found that your audience or your users hang out on, let's say, Discord or Reddit, then really try to immerse yourself in that space and the point is not trying to be a marketer, but be another participant, because what you're doing is you're trying to learn from the discussions, you're trying to understand the jokes, the memes, the slang, the language that they use, and just sort of really ask yourself, what would you do in their shoes? So yeah.
That's an incredible answer. That was amazing. Uh, what I like about this, and also what I think is sort of different about this approach to how things have kind of been done historically, is it's not necessarily a scalable approach in the sense of, uh, if I turn on ads, I can reach, 10 million people in a target demographic essentially instantly, right? But it's
Mhm.
a one to many sort of distribution where it's not highly personalized, and that's really different to something like me going into Reddit and engaging
Mhm.
one on one with folks, and really kind of like understanding the culture, as you said, understanding the memes, the language, all of that. But what I like about this is that it really kind of it humanizes the way that we're engaging a little bit as marketers.
Mhm.
And would you say that that is kind of a desirable quality in, I guess, if you want to call it like modern marketing, having a little bit more of like a human one to one or like one to few mode of distribution versus kind of the mass scale that historically we've used?
I would say so because, like I said earlier as well, especially if you're targeting younger audiences, um, they they can detect when they're being sold to. So mass kind of approach would not work for them, and they're demanding more personalized approach. So um, a more customized, personalized approach to marketing to these younger audience would be, I would recommend that. Yeah.
Got it. So the second question I kind of had about the example you gave is you said that they've gotten great engagement on YouTube. They have
Hmm.
all sorts of people coming into the comments, probably with a lot of positive feedback. Um, so, in your experience, or kind of from your professional perspective, what is the best way for brands to make sense out of the feedback they're getting on social? It could be, hey, you just need to read every comment and have, essentially have a team that's going to surface insights from those. Or maybe there's a step beyond that where it's, hey, you're actually going into the comments and making an effort to reply to all or most of the folks who are talking to you on social. So if I'm a brand, tell me a little bit about what to do with all of the sort of feedback I'm getting on social.
Okay. That's let's say that, okay, let's use an example actually. Let's say that you are a brand that is a gaming app that is targeted towards the younger people. So let's say that we've conducted primary research and social research for this client. Here's what I would do next. So um, imagine that we've seen on social media that our audience love a certain types of humor and references. So I would suggest prepare social posts or any sort of content that echo that kind of theme. So for example, if let's say retro gaming memes are trending, we might create content that reference that kind of older games, but with a twist that ties back to our app. But again, I would also avoid overselling the app or avoid talking too much about ourselves, because the goal is to create something that is funny and resonate with them. So that one way I would go about it. And in terms of engaging with the comments, um, if you're a smaller brand, I would try to encourage the team to respond to all comments as possible. But obviously, in this case, Food Asylum, like we said earlier, they've got like millions of thousands of comments. So understandably, brands do not have the time just to engage with all of them. But to build a deeper conversation or relationship with these audience, involve them in the decision making process. So conduct polls, Q&A, etc. on social media, like on Instagram. Just encourage them to send you questions and um, respond to those questions. I think it's another way great as well.
Yeah. In terms of how you would sort of, I guess, operationalize the like the questions and engagement you're getting on social, can you tell me, like, could it be as simple as, hey, we have our marketing team, a social marketing lead, they're getting questions on Instagram or on TikTok, whatever. Um,
Mhm.
what do I do with those questions? Do I take them to like my product team and say, hey, here's what people are saying. What can we do to kind of turn this into maybe a new feature, or update our branding, things like that. Can you just give me maybe an example of how you've kind of taken something from the world, something that was surfaced on the world of social, and kind
Mhm.
of moved it downstream to make an impact on product or branding or things like that?
Okay, so one of my clients actually, when we did sort of social research for them, this client is this gaming app that I talked about earlier, and their audience or users are very creative and artistic, if you will. So we found out that the YouTuber Mariah Elizabeth is a very much trusted figure for this audience. So after we got that information, what we then do is obviously go on YouTube, binge a bunch of Mariah's videos. Um, Again, it is very personalized, but we're trying to understand the culture. So we would try to see the language that she is using and try to understand why is that certain type of language resonate with our audience. And we would scroll through the comments on her videos to identify any sort of relevant keywords or phrases that they're using, and then this would give us like a clearer understanding of the kind of vibes and language that um, they use, so that we can use it into our positioning. Because what better to have our target audience describe the problem that they're having, so we can update into our marketing. Um, and so this same client has a lot of content creators and YouTubers just creating a bunch of user generated content for them as well. So on TikTok and on YouTube. So they would make videos of themselves playing with the app, reviewing the app. And that is like a gold mine, because in the comments, people are brutally honest about what they like about the app and what they dislike about it, and what they would hope to improve or include in the app. So we would then use that information to send it over to the product team to update on the app. Does that make sense?
It does. And I think it really comes back to what we were talking about earlier, which is the process of sort of engaging and understanding with particularly younger audiences on social. It is really it's this more personalized, more targeted kind of process. And I like to kind of just distinguish between the process you're talking about and something more, I guess you could call it traditional, like just running ads or running like
Mhm.
a huge email campaign in mass. And the process you're describing, it is more work. You have to be more in the details, but I think what comes
Mhm.
out the other side is a brand that really speaks the language of the audience they're trying to reach. um, and I think that is well worth the effort. It's actually something we've seen just with some of the clients we've worked with when we run like large interview campaigns. One of the things that clients will actually pull out of that is the specific language that they're sort of stakeholders or audience are using, and they say, oh, it's like you said, what better language to use than the language that my target audience is already using for themselves? They're describing the
Yeah.
product for you. And so if you can understand that and, like you described, kind of put in the work to really get down to the level, like in the comment sections or in Reddit threads, or wherever this language is kind of surfacing, if you can find that, that's a gold mine from a marketing
Hmm.
standpoint. Um, so I want to talk about your research process, but before we get there, I just wanted to maybe do like a compare and contrast of, you know, maybe to start, what are some ways that brands are kind of failing on social? And you don't have to throw anybody under the bus. You can, unless you want to, but you can. You could maybe just take us through, like, some instances where it's like, oh, they're clearly trying to reach, especially like a younger audience, but they're just kind of falling flat on their face. And then maybe we can
Mm.
talk about, you've already given some great examples, but if you have other examples of brands doing an excellent job, I think it'd be nice to just compare and contrast the sort of do's and don'ts for engaging Gen Z on
Right,
social.
right. So, oof, should I throw people under the bus? So uh, we've seen a couple of failed attempts actually from especially large corporations. So Burger King back in 2021, they made a very sensitive comment about women. Um, and then also Pepsi, their like irrelevant use of memes on Instagram that is trying to target at Gen Z, I also feel that is very inauthentic and just not genuine. Um, but I think there's this example that I've witnessed firsthand from last week actually, of a brand that is trying too hard to resonate with Gen Z and build at it. So um, just to give you a bit of context, there's a drama going on in the UK. There's this influencer in the UK called Nella Rose, and she is a UK youth favorite. But she's on this season of I'm a Celebrity, and she recently got into an argument with another participant named Fred. And the argument was about that Fred made a comment about him being old enough to be Nella's dad, and Nella did not take that well because she obviously previously told Fred that her parents are no longer alive. So after that comment, she felt it was best to cut off all ties with Fred, including not speaking to him at all, not eating anything that he cooked, even though Fred did apologize to her and he was really genuine about it. So this raised a debate among the UK audience and it sparked an attack on Nella. But here comes the crazy part. Brands who have no reason to get involved in this have thought that it was necessary to tweet their opinion about this. So Boohoo, the clothing brand, is one of them. So Boohoo tweeted Nella with a thumbs down emoji. Obviously, they've already deleted it. And respectfully, we don't need brands whose focus should be on their clothes tweeting about stuff that aren't relevant. So if brands like Boohoo, who clearly have quite a large and influential platform, are not trying to uplift someone, they shouldn't tweet. So naturally, Boohoo got backlash for this. And I just think that it is the biggest failed attempt at engaging the Gen Z audience because they're trying too hard to be relevant to understand the pop culture, but they didn't understand the context, and this had obviously damaged their reputation. So, to answer your questions in terms of the do's and don'ts, I would say number one, do's for brands and businesses to stay in their lane, like just really just focus on the core business values and like, yeah, core business values rather than just commenting on unrelated controversies or personal matters. So in this case, Boohoo's tweet was a lot of us, a lot of Gen Z thought it was irrelevant, inappropriate, and inauthentic because we can see that they were trying too hard. And in terms of the don'ts, I would say just avoid negative engagement because it can backfire. So brands should really just try to create positive, uplifting engagement with their audience instead of any negative engagement. And also, don't capitalize on controversy. We've seen a lot of brands actually attempting to leverage controversies or personal disputes just for engagement and or brand visibility as well. But it is very risky and often perceived negatively as well. So yeah, what are that's some of the do's and don'ts I would say.
Yeah, and one thing that kind of stood out to me in your answer there is that some of the failings of brands on social, it kind of comes down to not fully understanding the context. And so one part of that could be understanding what sort of is and is not inbounds for your brand to comment on. And like
Hmm.
you said, there are some instances where essentially people look at one of these social posts and say, no one really asked you. And actually,
Yeah.
we would have been fine if you just had nothing to say about this, but now you're going to get all this backlash on social. So
Yep.
yeah, not understanding kind of where is their lane, um, what's inbounds, off bounds. But
Mm.
then I think some of your earlier examples were also just about brands essentially trying to, leverage memes or other sort of like cultural elements without fully understanding what they're doing.
Hmm.
And it kind of sounds like someone in the marketing department said, "Oh, we're trying to reach Gen Z. Like, let's just slap a meme on it." And
Yeah.
they love memes, right? So it's let's just post one of those, and we'll do great. So I think that's a case where, yeah, really putting in the time beforehand to understand your audience and
Hmm.
really kind of learn how to speak their language on social in particular is a must have for brands. And so I actually want to ask a little bit about what does your kind of research process look like? So if you're helping a brand kind of approach their audience on social, what do
Hmm.
you do kind of at the start to understand who their audience is, the language they speak, the memes that are going to resonate, and things like that?
Mm. So there's two type of research, yeah. Traditional research and social research. So when it comes to like primary research, I mean, so for primary research, obviously there's two main ways, just interviews and surveys. I think what sets this approach apart from traditional research is that when it comes to conducting interviews with these target audience, I would avoid any sort of interviews that feels like a job interview. And I would just strive to have like a normal, friendly, informal conversation with this group because when they feel safe enough to open up, they're more willing to be honest and give really valuable insights. And the amount of insights that we can get from just being very informal can be very really valuable rather than just surface level information. Um, and in terms of surveys, when I would approach the same approach as well. Um, so when designing surveys, I would just adopt a conversational style sort of surveys, and I would avoid doing like a overly formal approach because using simple language can make research feel less than a test and more like a dialogue. So for this audience specifically, different styles of questions, multiple choices if suitable, because long traditional surveys may not be as effective as this demographic. So anything that resemble their communication style, I would really strongly recommend. So so that is the sort of primary research approach that I would go about and do. And then once I have more information about who their audience is, what they look like, what their behavior, what their interests, then we would use that information to create like sort of personas that can help us guide us with other marketing related activities. But yeah.
And when it comes to social research, can you tell us a little bit about that? I think earlier you said for one of the brands you worked with, part of your research process was finding out which like YouTubers their audience was into, and then going and binging, a bunch of those YouTube videos. Can you
Mhm.
tell us, kind of at a high level, what does social research look like, and what are some of the main things that you're trying to accomplish in those research initiatives?
So in terms of social research, I the main goal is to really like for us to really understand their culture and understand their online behavior, and then that could help us determine their shopping habits, shopping behavior as well. But in terms of the social research process, like I said earlier, it's also influencer because it's a big thing for this demographic. But other than that, like I said previously as well, Gen Z live and breathes on social media. So I would have to do a deep dive into um like whether they hang out on, let's say, TikTok or Discord or Reddit. Then again, I would immerse myself in that community as well, just to understand the sort of language that they use, and then use that information to inform marketing strategies. And then that's the first step. And then influencer research, which we already talked about. And I would also do a lot of user generated content deep dive as well, because like I said, that's like a gold mine of information, insights, can collect a lot of insights from that and inform our marketing strategies. Yeah.
Yeah, I actually wanted to go back really quick to something you said about the primary research. So something I loved about your answer there was that connecting with specifically a Gen Z audience, they want interviews that don't feel like a job interview, and
Mhm.
they want surveys that don't feel like a test, essentially. Or and what kind of stood out to me about that is that brands should approach these sort of research projects not with a purely extractive mindset. So I think too often when we reach out to people in our audience or our stakeholders, uh, we are only trying to solve for an us problem and not really considering what the
Yeah.
experience ought to be like for them. And something that you kind of touched on was that when members of your audience feel comfortable, they feel safe, with the person they're talking to, they're liable to kind of open up more. So could you tell me, maybe just say a little bit more about like, how do you, in terms of primary research, how do you sort of humanize that process instead of making it feel like a job interview or a test or basically another boring survey where you're just like,
Mhm.
going to get really low quality answers because they feel like, oh, this is basically not even worth my time.
Mhm. So in terms of the technical stuff, like designing the questions or creating the surveys, like just not try to use language that makes it feel like you're from the 1600s, like really formal, really hard to understand kind of language. So I would avoid any sort of questions that are like that. Obviously, I would have like a template of all the questions that I want to ask, but like I said, I'm a member of the Gen Z demographic. So when it comes to doing research, if the other person is also a Gen Z member, I would just strive to be myself. Like the point is just to have a conversation like you're talking to a friend. Because like I said, Gen Z prefers when people are authentic and themselves. So that is a way that I would humanize the process a little bit more. Like just strive to be authentic and yourself when doing this.
And do you have any advice for brands? Because I think, you know, ultimately a brand, it's a collection of humans, right? And so for each individual person within the brand, they say, well, I'm human, you know, I'm this person. But then once you kind of zoom out, you know, all people see on social once brands get to a big enough size is they just see a company logo, right? And
Hmm.
sometimes I think what brands struggle with is that they're seen as basically this corporate entity
Totally.
as opposed to someone or something that is approachable, human, um, you know, they would feel comfortable talking to. So, do you have any advice for brands out there who are trying to be a little bit more human and a little bit more approachable, especially to younger audiences?
Um, Firstly, I would say that is a really interesting question. Just to So in terms of strategy, what I would recommend, and I recommend this to a lot of clients as well, try to obviously if you're a small brand, you should post content that talks about behind the scenes or talk about how does it feel to work at your company, da 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 da. The point is to not trying to sell something, but it really shows there's a relatable side to your business rather than just a soulless, faceless corporate entity. Um, so that is one thing, like one action or advice that I would suggest. In terms of other advice, I would say, like I said earlier as well, um, do a lot of social listening. So um, because it can help you to get insight into your audience and know you can use that information to sort of understand how to talk to them and engage with them on a more deeper level as well. Yeah, so those are the advice that I would have for brands trying to be more human.
Yeah. Um, let's see. I have maybe just one or two quick questions here, and then we can wrap up. Let's see. So I know that you mentioned that you're, in addition to your role as a CMO, you're also working as a marketing mentor. So if we just can zoom way out, and I would just wanted to ask, like, what advice would you have for maybe aspiring marketers or, you know, people who are established in the marketing world but are trying to wrap their heads around social marketing specifically? Um, what advice would you have for those people who want to be, um, the words I'm using here are insights driven, and what I mean by insights driven are is they just want to understand their audience so that they can do social in a way that just feels authentic and real. Do you have any kind of like big picture advice for people who want to do that?
Um, I think this kind of advice is also talked about in our conversation today quite a lot as well. The biggest advice I would have is go beyond the basics in customer analysis and research. So we've seen a lot of brands who know the importance of understanding their audience, but what they mean by understanding the audience is just create like a customer persona and never look at it again. So what I would suggest to is to go beyond that. So really focus on the kind of challenges, the kind of problems that your audience is facing, what are their interests are, where they hang out on where do they hang out on online, like I said earlier, also put yourself in their shoes. Constantly ask yourself, what would they do if this situation were to arise? How would they speak? How would they respond to it? How would they feel? I feel like once we're able to really resonate deeply with the user or the audience on a deeper level, um, you can gain a lot of insights from that.
That was an amazing answer. That was very well said. I have two rapid fire questions for you, and then we can wrap up here. So, first rapid fire question is when it comes to marketing, especially social marketing, do you have any hot takes that you want to share with us? Any sort of like maybe out of the box perspectives or contrarian things that you think about social marketing that maybe aren't consensus opinions?
That is a really good question. Caught me off guard, actually.
Don't
I
mean
have
to
to
put you on
say.
the spot, but I totally
um,
am. So sorry.
um, I would say that brands who are not investing in understanding their audience are going to fail miserably. That is one
That's
hot take that I have. Um, Obviously, like I said earlier, the younger audience, especially Gen Z, they're growing up and they actually have one of the biggest purchasing power in the world right now. What they demand from brands and companies are a more personalized shopping experience. Um, so by personalized, I mean that you really have to understand their experience so that you can provide a better, more personalized experience for them. And if you don't do customer research enough and you don't really understand them enough, you will not be able to do that. And you're sadly going to fail. That is
that's
one
a
hot
good
take that I
one.
have.
I like it. Last question for you, Tina, is can you just tell us where to find you on? Well, we know you're on social, but if you want to shout out, the companies you work for, tell us where to find you, social handles, anything like that. I'd love to just kind of give people an on ramp to learn more about you and follow all the great content that you produce because I know that everything I've seen you create on LinkedIn, loved it, super helpful. So yeah, just share with others how they can also follow along.
Of course. So you can follow me on LinkedIn. I am mostly only present on LinkedIn actually. And my name is Tina Locke. My handle, I think, on LinkedIn is Tina LNKX. So that's my handle. But other than that, anyone can just email me at tina@wescalestartups.com. That's my work email. I'm happy to answer any questions. And if you want to check out my website, that is wescalestartups.com. Yeah,
Amazing. Tina, thank you so much for this conversation. I think this is the longest episode we've recorded because you had so many great things to say, and I found myself just wanting to ask more and more follow up questions just to kind of pull out all these great insights. So, thank you so much for spending time with us today. I really appreciate it.
thank you so much. I'm really honored to be a part of this.